Have you ever actually stopped to think about the absolute oldest, most profound mystery in human history? Today, in this explainer, we're tackling a question that literally every single person on Earth eventually faces, and yet no one can answer it with absolute universal certainty. We're going to explore the ultimate mystery: what happens after we die? I'm honestly so fascinated to explore this with you, because by using some really structured frameworks, we can take a topic that usually feels overwhelmingly vast and just break it down into understandable pieces together. So here it is, the core question: what happens after we die? Now, because there is no single definitive answer that satisfies every discipline, the absolute best way to investigate the aftermath of death is to look at it through three distinct lenses. We aren't here to tell you what to believe. Rather, we're going to look at exactly how different fields of human knowledge view this massive transition. We'll start with what we know for a fact, then move into what science theorizes, and finally, we'll explore what billions of people around the world believe. All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. After our ultimate question, we'll ground ourselves in the biological reality, shift over to the science of consciousness, explore spiritual beliefs, and then wrap it all up with life's final frontier. Moving into section 2, the biological reality, or what happens to the physical body. Okay, so before we get into any theories or beliefs, we have to start with the absolute, undeniable physical and medical reality of the dying process. Let's look at the exact chronological sequence. When the heart stops beating, the body undergoes a very specific, natural progression. Step 1 is clinical death. This is when the heart stops pumping blood and breathing ceases entirely. Within just minutes of this happening, the lack of oxygen causes cells to begin dying, starting right in the brain. Step 2 is biological death. This occurs when the brain cells completely give out due to that lack of oxygen. The crucial point here is that at this stage, the process becomes entirely irreversible. And finally, we reach step 3, the recycling of matter. Over time, the physical body decomposes. It returns its chemical elements, things like carbon, nitrogen, and calcium, right back to the earth. It's a profound biological cycle, honestly. The exact same atoms that make up your body right now were once forged in the hearts of dying stars, and they'll go on to sustain new life. Next up, section 3, the science of consciousness. Where does the mind go? We've covered the physical body, which is measurable and known, but where the self or the consciousness goes is much more mysterious. What researchers have actually observed in the brain at the very end is absolutely wild. Studies show that right at the moment of death, the brain often experiences a massive spike in electrical activity. It's kind of like the brain's final surge. And some scientists believe this exact electrical surge is responsible for what we call near-death experiences, or NDEs. You've probably heard people describe seeing a tunnel of light, feeling a sudden sense of profound peace, or intensely reliving memories, that famous life flashing before your eyes phenomenon. Well, science suggests this could all be tied directly to that final burst of electricity in the brain. Following that final surge, science is pretty much split into two primary camps. On one hand, we have the materialist view. Most mainstream neuroscientists argue that consciousness is entirely a product of the physical brain. Therefore, when the brain stops functioning, consciousness simply turns off. Think of it like a computer just being powered down or falling into a deep, completely dreamless sleep. But on the other hand, we have the energy view. A minority of researchers lean on the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. They ponder whether the electrical and quantum energy that actually makes up our consciousness transitions into another form entirely. Now, this remains totally unproven, sure, but it is an absolutely fascinating scientific hypothesis. Which brings us to section 4, spiritual and philosophical beliefs. The journey of the soul. Because science can only measure the physical, and that energy view remains unproven, billions of people across the globe turn to rich spiritual and philosophical frameworks to understand what happens to the mind, or the soul. Let's start by looking at the afterlife as understood by monotheistic faiths. Religions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism view death not as an end, but as a transition to an eternal realm. In these traditions, the soul is judged based on its earthly life, its deeds, its faith, or through divine grace. The outcome of this judgment leads to a state of eternal peace and closeness with the divine, often called heaven or paradise, or is separation from it, known as hell. It's very much a linear journey from earthly life directly to an eternal destination. Now contrast that with Eastern traditions, which view the timeline of life very differently. Central to religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism is the concept of samsara. Samsara is defined as a continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In this framework, death is absolutely not the end. Instead, it's merely a turning point in an ongoing, cyclical journey. So what actually drives this cycle of samsara? Well, that brings us to karma. Karma is the accumulated actions of past lives. It's essentially the mechanism that dictates the new physical body that the soul, often referred to as the Atman, or the consciousness, will take on in its next life. The whole goal of this continuous cycle of rebirth, guided by karma, is to learn and grow until eventually achieving ultimate spiritual liberation, which is known as moksha or nirvana. But what about folks who don't hold religious views? Well, many philosophical materialists, secular humanists, and agnostics view death as a state of eternal oblivion, which they actually see as the ultimate peace. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus perfectly captured this mindset when he said, "Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not. And when death exists, we are not." Basically, in this secular view, you simply won't be around to feel lonely, bored, or sad about being dead. It's considered to be identical to the exact way you felt before you were born, just a complete neutral peace. Finally, Section 5, Life's Final Frontier, the Ultimate Possibilities. We have covered biological realities, scientific theories, and some deeply held beliefs. Zooming all the way out, the source material points us toward 3 ultimate possibilities for what happens next. Number 1, a peaceful return to the universe, whether that's through the literal recycling of our atoms into the earth or returning to the quiet oblivion we experienced before birth. Number 2, a continuation of a grand spiritual journey, moving into an eternal realm or continuing through a cycle of rebirth. Or number 3, an entry into a brand new state of existence entirely, perhaps as our conscious energy transforms into something science just doesn't quite understand yet. Ultimately, what happens next remains life's greatest unsolved mystery. We've looked at the evidence, the theories, and the ancient wisdom, but the final definitive answer still eludes us. So I want to leave you with this one thought to ponder today. Based on the biology, the science, and the philosophy we've unpacked in this explainer, what do you believe awaits in life's final frontier? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep asking